Hello everybody! It's been a while since I've done a YouTube video, but I have recently come back from the London Chess Classic, where I've been playing FIDE Open with some very strong players in there, and I thought I'd like to analyse some of my games for you. So since we've last spoken, I have achieved the WFM title that I was working towards, and I am now trying to make WIM, so Women's International Master, where I currently have 2 norms. So I need 1 more norm from some kind of Swiss event, and I need to reach a rating of 2200. So I am training hard at this, analysing my games, was playing this tournament to try and learn a lot, playing games where every single round my opponent was at least 100 points higher rated than me, and I hope to learn something and improve and achieve WIM in the future. So in round 1, I got paired against an FM from Scotland, Murad Abdulla, just over 2300 rated, and I was black. So when I was preparing for this, it was not really that clear what he might play. He's played a few different things, sort of variants on d4, c4, knight f3. So I looked at a few lines, did some puzzles and things, and thought I'd go up and give it my best shot. So he opened with knight f3, and I continued with d5, and he chose g3. And at this point I was thinking maybe he saw a game that I played in 4NCL recently, where my opponent did this sort of thing as white and got a very bad position quite quickly. So I had a plan to sort of do something a bit different this time. So I went for e6. I'm basically just trying to be solid and not commit my c-pawn quite yet. The idea is that I'm probably going to want to play e6 anyway, as the knight covers this e5 square. And I'm going to want to move this pawn to solidify my pawn. My bishop will probably go to b7. c4 is a sort of move that could be played in this position, the sort of delayed bishop g2 to create a Catalan, and I think this would probably transpose more to the sort of thing I've had poor positions with before, because the problem black has here is that it's probably best to take this early on, when now after bishop g2 I've not sort of committed to my structure, I've gone with this. Whereas if he plays c4 later, as you'll see, it's easier to sort of decide on my games. But he went for bishop g2, the sort of main line, keeping things flexible. And again, it's hard because you don't know as black whether white's planning on playing d4 or c4 or a bit of both. So I just continued with knight f6 to be solid. And again, if c4, you probably at some point have to take to go into those critical Catalan lines. Ideally, black wants to get c5 in first, so that when c4 comes, d4 is a stronger move. He castled, again remaining flexible, and here I went bishop e7. And now at this point I was sort of convinced, I was like, he's just going to go for this sort of position I had in my game recently, where my opponent sort of got d4 and c4 in and managed to give me quite a poor pawn structure and play against that. But instead he went for d3, sort of King's Indian attacking idea. Maybe he was thinking, oh, I'm much lower rated, he wants to keep the pieces on the board, go for something a bit aggressive. But actually I was quite happy when he did this, because I don't think it's as critical as some of the other options. And I had done a little bit of work thinking through some ideas and playing in this previously for preparation for a different game, which I hadn't actually used over the board yet, so he didn't know that I had this preparation, which was quite cool. So I castled knight g2 and I went for c5. So normally in these sorts of positions I play the move c6, and the problem with this is that although it looks like black has a solid structure, white gets moves like e4 and rook e1 in quite quickly, and gets the sort of space advantage that they want in the center. and black's just constantly wishing that they'd played c5 so that they have ideas of expanding on the queen side themselves. I guess you have to think of this like when white's playing the King's Indian attack, it's like the reverse of black playing a King's Indian defense, where typically white would play on the queen side, so in this case black should do the same and play on the queen side, gaining space. And I think here my opponent was quite surprised, maybe was expecting c6 as that's what I'd played in the past, but been working on my openings a bit, decided I need to start going for these more mainline, pushing for advantages when I can, and I have to play it out, see what happens, learn from it, or improve. Went for and e4, knight c6. Basically, black wants to keep this tension in the center. White would be quite happy if we were to capture on e4. I actually probably would take back with the pawn because they want to play e5 at some point, and they open up the d file. And we no longer have this sort of target on d3 that we can push for. We can't blockade with d4, so this would not be a good idea. So instead we just wait. And we basically say if white wants to take, well, now we're going to be happy because we're the one that has these two pawns in the center that we can push through with, and there's no pawn coming to e5 to kick our knight. So instead of this, white chose e5. I think rook e1 first was the move I'd looked at a bit more in my preparation. Again, keeping things flexible, and white sort of saying they probably want to go e5, but maybe not yet, and wait and see how black decides to set things up. But my opponent went for the immediate e5. So here I have to move my knight. Knight g4 doesn't really make much sense because it's a bit misplaced, and I probably have to play a move like f6 to try and get my knight back. Otherwise I'm at risk of losing it. Whereas coming to d7, I put pressure on the pawn, remain flexible. So now white has to defend the pawn, rook e1. And here I went for b5. Again, I sort of knew from my preparation that the idea was to try and expand on the queen side, and b5 is multi-purpose because it helps me to get some more pawns over here, but also prepares to go bishop b7 because obviously with this pawn on e6, my bishop's not going to be able to go out that way. And here white thought for a while and then went for h4. And I was not expecting this. I guess maybe it's a sort of move I probably should have considered a bit more, given that white's played this King's Indian attack setup. They want to go for an attack. But normally I was expecting these knights to maneuver a bit first. Maybe something like a knight f1 to open up this bishop here, ready for the attack, before then going for moves like h4. And giving white a useful temple they'd probably want anyway. But I sort of looked at this position like, okay, white wants to attack. I don't really have to fear this yet. Like, this pawn's not on my king yet. I can play a few developing moves first. So I thought bishop b7. Well, my bishop probably has to go to b7. Might as well make that move. And he went h5. And then here I was thinking, okay, this is fine. I don't mind the pawn on h5, but probably I shouldn't let this pawn come to h6. Because if the pawn comes to h6, I might have to make a move like g6 or take on h6 and open up my king and the dark squares. Especially with this pawn on e5 already sort of pressure on f6 so that my bishop can't come onto that diagonal. I didn't really want to allow that, so I went h6 blocking it now. And now he went for knight f1. And now the problem I had here is that I struggled to come up with a clear plan. I think, yeah, I'd looked at a few games in these sorts of lines, but the games that white always would be a position of c3 thrown in. You would see moves like b4 and then c4 and put pressure over here. And thinking about this now, I was like, I don't actually sort of know why those moves are meant to be important. Why do all the white players play this c3 idea if it just helps black get b4 in? And what is my sort of plan here? Probably I should just go a5 and continue attacking and basically argue that white doesn't really have much here, right? Let's say he plays knight h2, similar to what we'll see in the game. just a4. And at some point, white's probably going to have to play a3 or something to stop me. Otherwise, I'm just going to go b4. And then maybe c4 as well at some point. And just basically get these really strong pawns on the queen side and eventually open things up over there. And white's just too slow to get in something like g4, g5. My king will be okay. But the problem I had in this position was I was thinking, well, they haven't played c3 yet, so b4 actually attacking the pawn. And I was starting to get a bit scared. I was like, well, they haven't played this move on the queen side. Like the positions I was looking at, c3 and a5 had been put in. So they're now one extra tempo ahead towards the attack, the normal. And I think I just started second guessing myself. I had a really long think here. And then I was like, okay, if he's going to come and attack, maybe I should just run my king over to the queen side. But that is not how we should be playing these positions. And next time I get this position, I will not be doing that. But basically, I was like, I need to move my queen out of the way, then my rook out of my way, and then sort of king can run if it needs to. And then I was trying to think between queen c7 and queen b6. Both looked interesting. Queen c7 puts a bit of pressure on this e5 pawn, but the problem is that white can just defend it with bishop f4, which is a developing move they probably want to make anyway. And then there's always these sort of ideas of this bishop lining up with the queen. Maybe something would happen on f6 and I can't really take because the pawn would recapture. And the queen's not really helping me very much on this square if this pawn is defended. Even if the bishop wasn't on f4, I may not even be able to capture on e5 anyway because of future bishop f4 pins. So in the end I decided, okay, I'm just going to play queen b6. He went knight h2. And then I was like, okay, I want to play on the queen side. Again, probably a5, a4 was a better plan here. But I went rook c8, which is still okay in this position. Like, the c file is a good place to put the rook. There's potentially lines where things can open up on the c file, and the c2 pawn here become really quite weak. If I manage to move my own c pawn and get lined up here. So he went for knight g4. And then this is where I made my first sort of mistake as such of the game, where I just tried to run with my king. I basically realized that things were not looking ideal now. My opponent has two knights, a bishop lining up, potentially like this rook and queen ready to swing in quite quickly, and also this pawn on g3 is going to come to g4 at some point. So I just got scared. I was like, okay, I should be running, right? Maybe get my king. Is that this h pawn on h5 becomes very strong if white then sacrifices on h6. So I choose the position. One, I can't completely over here, and white to attack. So for example, they could play a5. White might just go for this sort of sacrifice idea on h6. I mean, it's fine to check what happens if they do this. They play knight takes. Now the king comes to g7. This knight sort of gets in the way of white's pieces a bit. Queen d2 would defend it that way. Okay, needed, and the queen can't come to g5 with the bishop there. But if they come back to g4, again, I can now bring my rook back to h8, control this pawn a bit. I can always bring the other rook to g8 and then tuck my king away to f8. I'm basically just a piece up at that point, and my own rook will be powerful to play. Actually, I don't have to deal with white's attack yet. And let's say they don't go for the sacrifice, they instead play bishop f4. Again, I just continue with a4. Maybe queen d2, trying to line up. And moves like a3 are still good here, because, again, this bishop h6 is never really going to be off, even if I can take as I afterwards the computer was always d8 idea, which I just completely missed, a backwards move. I've moved my queen to b6 like quite recently and then bring it back, and the idea is you just control the g5 square. And then this is sort of the similar idea I could also play in this position. The computer just likes queen d8, just going, well, you're not going to do anything if we control this g5 square, and now I'm going to continue with a5, a4, b4, and black has a slight edge here. But instead of this attack, I run king. Actually, sort of did the sacrifices on h6, and I was a little bit worried that the pawn on h5, but I hadn't realized quite how strong it actually is. So knight takes h6 does in fact work, takes, bishop takes. And my original idea was, okay, I can run this way because if I come back to g8, then I've just lost 2 moves on king f8, king g8 that are quite helpful for white. I think in my analysis I was looking at bishop g7 here, with the idea of literally just pushing this pawn all the way through. And I was thinking, oh, don't I just have bishop f8? Because if h6, then I can trade here and then move my king out the way and cover this. And I was thinking this is probably fine, right? I'm just playing rook g8. But now there's an idea of like the queen coming in here and coming to g5. And then white is just going to have constant pressure on me. And this pawn is more than worth the fact that they're down a piece. My own pieces are just sort of caught up on the queen side, and I can't ever tuck my king away around them. So white is just better here. And I think maybe king g8 is what the computer was saying was a better way of playing, but I don't think it's very human to play like this. Like, you've moved your king to f8, and even here white should just have a slight edge after queen here, and the queen will sort of come to f4 this time because the bishop controls the g5 square, but the king is really exposed. So white missed an opportunity here to take on h6. My calculation was just a bit off. I think I misjudged the sort of position, but luckily for me, white went c3. This is still actually a pretty decent move by white. They don't have to commit to capturing on h6 yet, but it gives me time to fix my pieces. And I still have the opportunity here to play queen back to d8 to just try and control everything here. But I realized that white's plan was to go d4 and try and sort of stop my own options of d4 over here and maybe open up the c file and things. But I was still sort of worried about this knight h6 idea. I was recalculating it again. So I was like, I'll run with my king again. And again, taking on h6 would have been really good for white. This time it's better to take first with the bishop, I believe, because there's no bishop check at the end of it. So doing it this way means that if I try and run to d8, then knight takes f7 is check. And it's really difficult here to just stop the plan again of the queen coming to d2 to f4 and putting pressure on this really weak pawn here. And this h pawn is probably going to go through at some point. So white missed another opportunity there, but he went bishop f4, which is still a decent move. And now I finally went for a5. So finally I'm going for this plan of I have to play on the queen side, which is good. And white went c4, which is the wrong. I think probably white should be aiming to push the d pawn at some point if they can, because then they solidify this e pawn here, which is just extra strong now. And my own bishop is kind of blocked in by this pawn because I don't ever have this sort of d4 option. So this might have been a better way of playing it. I was expecting something more like that. But after c4, I should note at this point, I think I was playing on increment already. I'd wasted so much time on this sort of queen b6 and rook c8 and king f8, king e8, which was not the right plan. And now I've got like 30 seconds per move to play another 25 moves before I get extra time. And I'm just sort of thinking really, really quickly. I don't really have time to properly evaluate the position or anything. I'm just basically trying to make moves that don't blunder. until I reach the time control and can reevaluate. So I went d4 with the idea of opening bishop. With this move and open up my bishop there. He went knight d2, which is a very clever move. Now that I've played d4, I'm not controlling the e4 square, and his knight is going to be so strong on e4. It will be sort of putting pressure to come to d6, but even controlling f6, stopping me ever getting rid of that e5 pawn. So here I went for knight b4. My idea was that I've probably got a worse position. I need to try and exchange some pieces, and now if the knight comes to e4, there's always going to be ideas of bishop taking it if I have to. But I was thinking if I exchange the light squared bishops, it's one less thing I have to worry about. Plus I am putting pressure on this d3 pawn as well. So he plays knight e4, which I think is a very sensible move. The queen now defends the pawn, and he wants to keep the pieces on because he's envisioned the situation where the bishop becomes strong. Maybe it comes to h3, puts pressure on e6 or something. And so I was like, well, I've not got much time. I need to make a lot of moves. If I just sit here moving backwards and forwards, I'm going to get mated before too long. I need to just play on the queen side, which is what I should have been doing right from the start. So I went a4. The idea is just to sort of complicate things a bit. I want to try and go a3. At least I have a clear plan of moves that I want to make on the queen side. And having a plan makes it easier to make moves more quickly. And probably he should just go knight d6 here, where I'm forced to take because of the pressure on b7. And now if he trades off on b7 and takes on d6, this position's really difficult to play for me. My pieces are all sort of caught back. It's difficult to put them on good squares. Not ever going to get e5 in. My pawns on f7 and e6 are big targets. And at any point he likes, he can always just take on h6 when he's reached the right moment and have this really strong h-pawn. But he went for a3, kicking my knight and blocking me from playing a3 myself. And I just brought my knight back to c6. Probably, if I'd realised how strong this knight d6 idea is, I should probably just take on e4. But I was thinking when he takes, he now has a pair of really powerful bishops. Knight c6 is the only move here because obviously the bishop hits here and the pawns hit here. But then I've just walked myself into a pin. And if I ever play rook b8, there's a risk that this bishop here is quite strong if the pawn on e5 is able to move. And I wasn't really 100% how I can continue here. But the computer sees it all and basically just says it's equal because I've got enough play with my pawns on the queen side. I have ideas of taking on c4 and then taking on b2 and having a potentially strong pawn of my own if I can play like the move c5 at some point and open up my own bishop. And actually these white bishops aren't that great. I guess because there's a lot of pawns still on the board, the bishops aren't as strong because the position's not open. But okay, I brought my knight back to c6. And again, he could have gone for this knight d6 idea. Same sort of thing of having this pawn on d6 that would be strong. But he went b3. And I was quite happy with this because I'd seen like all these sort of weird tactical ideas. But don't play tactics when you're in time trouble. Honestly, it's a terrible idea. I think I miscalculated quite a few things. But I went for sort of taking and then taking on c4 and then knight a5. So my idea now was actually my knight has some strong squares it can come into. My queen's got the b file open. Suddenly I can get some piece activity that I wasn't getting before. And so I was quite happy in this position. But I do just have to be a little bit careful that I don't drop some material somewhere, like rook b1's coming There might be ideas of knight d6 and rook b1 and the b7 bishop is weak. But I think was his idea. But he has to deal with his queen here, so he plays queen c2. And then here I was thinking, oh no, he's going to play rook b1 and knight d6 and then somehow win material. So I thought, oh, I need to get rid of this knight. Again, probably better is to just play rook here and wait for it. If he goes for knight d6, I always have to take. But now I get some kind of activity, something like queen b3 or queen b2. Probably queen b3, so I put pressure on the d pawn. And I also have ideas of coming back to d5 check. And if I come here, I can win this h pawn. But you don't see all these sorts of things in the time trouble. I'm just thinking instantly like, oh, my bishop might be weak, let's get rid of it. But it's sort of positionally wrong to exchange. So he takes, now I have to move my rook. But again, I was thinking, oh, I have ideas of queen b3, right? So bishop d2, going queen b3. Here, I didn't b3. Just thinking that rook be winning a piece. It's quite hard to manipulate this position, but actually I can just play the cool and calm collected move queen here, and before white has time to attack this knight again, I just stick the queen on a4, and I actually have a queenside presence with this knight on b3 that's backed up, threatening to take off on d2 if I need to, when my dark squared bishop might be able to be useful and put pressure on the a pawn. But it's one of those things where you just don't want to walk into pins when you're in time trouble. And I was thinking, okay, queen b3, my queen's active. He can't really exchange queens because then I'm probably going to win some material somehow, or at least I get rid of his bishop pair. So he has to move his queen back. And then I was like, oh, now his bishop's hitting my knight. I have to move my knight. So I played knight c6. But the problem is that the knight's not going to ever have anywhere good to go. I know it looks like it's threatening to take on e5 at the moment, but in reality, white can just move this bishop on e4 whenever they need to defend that, or play a move like bishop f4, and the knight's not going anywhere. Whereas the knight was well placed here. So actually, apparently, I should just come back again. White's obviously not going to repeat. Let's say they play rook b1. Now I can trade off some pieces here. And then I have to be a little bit careful, but I think c4 is an idea, and I can basically, once enough pieces are exchanged off, this pawn behind the rook becomes really strong, because if he takes on a5, there's just c3, and the bishop is threatening to come take on a3, and this knight can come into c5, put pressure as well. So I basically just have a really clear plan of like c2 and bishop takes a3, or if they stop that with like bishop b4, then knight c5, c2, knight b3, then I'll win a piece back because I'll have to sack it for the pawn. But again, I just can't calculate all this in the time pressure. So I just brought my knight back, and he went f4, which again is giving me chances. This is another moment he could have just played the cool taking on h6. Now that the queen was on c1, could have lined up. But I think he was also starting to get fairly low on time. You don't want to go sacrificing pieces if you don't have enough time to fully calculate it. But the point is that, again, this h pawn would just be really strong. But he went f4. So just defending the pawn. And here I just went completely crazy and sort of lost the plot a bit of my time scramble. What I should be doing is trying to make the most of my queenside presence, right? I have this pawn here. This one has ideas of coming to c4. I should be trying to get c4 to work. Or I can play a move like queen b2. Try and exchange the queens. And then maybe maneuver my knight back. Somehow if I can get it in there, if this bishop on d2 ends up having to move, and go for trying to play c4 in the right moment. Again, this bishop can line up on a3, so there might be a point if the rook on a1 moves where I can play c4 and then take on a3. So He has to be a bit careful here, and I can get play there. Instead, I started panicking about him going for stuff, and I tried going for tactics, but again, you shouldn't be doing that when you're low on time. So I played f5 thinking I thought it all through, and this is just a big blunder. And he had enough time to work out a good response here. The take on, you have to, you know. Actually turns out to be good here. And now I have the problem that if I take with the pawn, which is what I would ideally want to, there's just bishop g6 check. King moves, knight takes h6. And this h pawn's probably going to decide the game. I can try and block the bishop in with a move like f5, but now white can just play slowly. They're a pawn up. They could play something like queen c4 because this rook's putting pressure on e6 and they block the queen defending it, and my position's just falling apart. So I have to take with the knight. Now my idea is that when they take like this, there's no knight hitting h6. So he has this move f5, hitting. But luckily, I'd actually calculated this far and seen, okay, if they play f5, I have the e5 square for my knight. And I was thinking this is quite good. I think that's why I sort of went for f5, because I'd seen that idea. That's the one idea I had seen in my time scramble. But white can just be calm here and play g4. And this is really, really hard to deal with as black. Or he's basically just saying, at the right moment, I'm going to play g5, I'm going to trade things off, and then I'm going to march the h-pawn down the board. They might have to deal with something on the queen side first, but I'm just not really getting anywhere with it. So that would have been a good move by him. But f5, now I get the e5 square. And bishop f4. And this looks like it's just doing really quite well for white. Because these bishops are pretty strong. There's a pin here. He's threatening to take on e6. When the rook will become really strong lined up against my king. The h6 pawn can still be taken whenever he wants. And he can just sort of wait on the position. But I thought I'd calculated some idea. So I took on f5 thinking I could sacrifice the exchange. And the way that he went with bishop takes e5, it actually does work. But it turns out that he could have just taken on f5, the simple option, hit my rook here and then take on e5, and I don't have the cool exchange sack idea that I had, and I'm just losing here. Point is that if I go knight f3 check, the king comes to f2, I take the rook, he can just take with the queen. And now both my rooks are attacked, and the queen's putting huge pressure against the king. The h6 pawn's probably going to drop. And I don't really have anything with some kind of checks here, because the king can always just come back, and I run out of checks quite quickly. So bishop f5 would have been winning on the spot. Okay, so taking on f5 was bad. Turned out I had not seen this at all in the game. This was like help of computer after the game. But knight takes d3 is just equal. Crazy. So obviously the idea is that you're forking the queen and the rook, and white takes with the bishop, we take with the queen. But I was thinking here, hang on a minute, this bishop's just defending the g-pawn, so there's no perpetual, and the other bishop's hitting my rook. The rook's coming to e6 is like all crazy stuff, right? But if they take on b8, I actually get a better version of my exchange sacrifice that I went for. And he has to deal with this fact that I'm threatening a perpetual. But actually black's better here, because he has to deal with his king, and then I play e5 and I get some really strong pawns. So we can't do that. But if he takes on e6, I can just play rook b7, defending my bishop. So that if bishop d6, I'm not immediately going to lose some material. And actually black's just fine, again, because I've got this active queen that's sort of hinting at the idea of checking his king at some point. And I'm going to play c4 at some point, create my own sort of connected pass pawns here. And actually I have more than enough counterplay. I can always play king f7 to get out of this pin. And I shouldn't be worried about a move like bishop takes h6 because of queen takes g3. So they'd have to defend this first. I mean, I think queen e1 is a sort of move that looks quite natural to defend g3 and prepare king h6. But if I just go here, let's say they take here, now I have queen f5. So this queen on d3 is just really, really active. And I guess it's one of these things, like, even if you can't calculate it intuitively, you should see, yeah, the queen's going to be active there, and it would be good to get rid of that light bishop. But I missed this, I took on f5. Luckily, he took on e5, which was the move that I was hoping for, because now I did my exchange sacrifice, I took on e4. And this was the idea I'd basically calculated back when I went f5, so that when they take on b8, I take with the queen. If I take with the rook, I think I'm just completely losing on the spot after rook takes e4. I'm an exchange down with no compensation. I can't really take on d3 because I think there's some kind of check, and then the queen will come and take this rook somehow, like queen c7's coming. But the queen up this g pawn, and I'm threatening an immediate perpetual, so he has to deal with that. But the idea is that I thought at this point was, okay, I'm an exchange down, but actually these pawns are really quite strong. I have ideas of trying to target d3. They restrict his rook, and my bishop can work together with them. This g pawn's really quite weak as well. The bishop's coming to d6. This point we remove 35. I've only got 5 more moves to make to the time control, and I think I can probably like hold this. He went queen d1, and this was the really frustrating moment. I saw the correct move. I thought, okay, it's probably a good idea, and then I just chickened out and didn't do it. I should have just played king f7, which was my intuition, right? The idea is you want to go rook g8 and then bishop d6. And what does white do? This pawn is so weak. It's probably going to drop off. At some point you might put the queen on e5 and put pressure on this h pawn as well. And it's basically just better for black despite being material down. And I saw this and I thought it was the intuitive idea. I was like, I should go for this. And I was just like, I don't know what I was thinking about, second guessing, but I was like, okay, I'll just get my queen active first. So like queen e5 and then I'll play king f7. Problem now is queen g4. And now I can't go king f7 because of queen g6. Whereas in the previous line, if I'd played king f7 straight away, now with queen g4, there's rook g8. Here. And suddenly black's just winning. The queen e5, queen g4. And here I was like, okay. This is a problem, right? I've got 30 seconds per move. I only got to make a few more moves and then I get some time. Needed to sort of try and go for something. I was thinking rook b8, right? The queen was attacking my rook, so it was either sort of f5 or rook b8. Get myself out of that. Grab the file. I'm threatening to go rook b2 check, which would be nice. And I want to go like bishop d6 and stuff. And he goes rook b1, and I was like, yeah, this is what I was thinking as a problem. And this is just when everything just went horribly wrong. I initially was thinking bishop d6. Again, intuition, well, defend the rook again, and go for putting pressure on g3. But I got scared of this idea of him just trading and then bringing this other rook into the game. And I was thinking, like, how do I deal with this, right? Queen c8 is a threat. But if I play bishop back to d6 where it's from, then rook b7 and queen d7 check's coming. And I thought I was just losing at this point. But actually it turns out you can just go bishop c7. Which is quite clever. And now the idea of rook b7 is you just go f5. Quite calm. And there's no sort of checks in the way. And if they go queen c8 check first, you just move the king, and they don't have time for this because you can take on g3. So you sort of keep your own pressure up to do this. And yeah, I think it's this f5 move that I hadn't really realised was quite so good. Also, even just moving the king to e7 is probably fine. White can't ever really go for queen g6 and take on h6 again because g3 drops. E2's threatened. Like, this is just strong here. And by this point, we get to move 41. Computer evaluates this as equal, but I actually think it's maybe even easier to play for black if you find these, like, bishop c7 to not lose the piece. how does white deal with this idea of e2 whilst also dealing with queen takes g3 and creating their own threats? I guess their only hope is to try and push their a pawn up the board, but you'll always be able to deal with that. And again, like something like queen g7 is just never going to work. You can always just defend with the king, and probably a perpetual is the most likely result at some point. And I think genuinely, if I'd found this sort of bishop d6 and gone for this, I probably would have held the game, because I would have got an extra 30 minutes at this point. I'd have plenty of time to think. But sadly, like the last couple of moves before the time control, I just blundered. So I was thinking I was leaving my bishop in that line, so I was like, okay, I'll just move my king. But this is just like the worst move on the board. It just blunders the queen g8 check. And now the queen is just going to take the rook, so here I resigned. And it was kind of a sad finish because I'd fought back so well against a strong opponent. I'd created these cool tactical ideas of sacrificing an exchange to go. And I was tired, I was in time trouble. My analysis from the London Chess Classic, and if any of you have any tips on how I can improve and aim to get to WIM, please do let me know, because I am very interested and keen, and I'm willing to try anything that could work. Putting a lot of work into various different things. But yeah, thanks for now, and hopefully see you soon.